August 10th marks the admission of Missouri as the 24th state in the American Union back in 1821, which might seem significant if y'all happen to live there. But as a matter of fact, it represents a triumph of practical politics. And I don't mean that in a good way. The United States was expanding in the early 19th century. Settlers were moving west into the territories, organizing them and applying for statehood. And time and again, the main issue was, will they be admitted as free or slave states? And the people who'd settled Missouri wanted to be a slave state. But it was necessary to maintain the balance between free and slave and to avoid having the issue of principle dominate the discussion. And so politicians, statesmen, dedicated, patriotic, and intelligent, found a compromise that pushed principle aside. They said, we'll admit Missouri as a slave state, but from now on, only territories south of Missouri's southern border can be admitted as slave states. Everything north of that will be free. And to balance the admission of a slave state, Maine was separated off from Massachusetts and admitted as a free state. Problem solved, or so you'd think. And certainly for the next 30 years, the Union prospered and expanded. But the thing about issues of principle is that they really are fundamental. And the issue here was, is a slave a human being or a possession? The United States was a free country with great respect for property rights. If a slave was a thing, then obviously the owner could take him or her into any territory, into any state. Nobody would pass a law saying you couldn't bring your axe or your horse. And so defenders of slavery said the same thing should apply to your slaves. But if a slave is a human being, then obviously they shouldn't be treated as a thing at all. And the law's continuing attempts to fudge this were doomed to fail. As even Thomas Jefferson realized, as an old man, he called the Missouri Compromise a fire bell ringing in the night, which took some gall because Jefferson, in my view, is the biggest single villain in the entire history of American slavery. As a young man, he advocated abolition, but as an old man, he refused to emancipate his own slaves or to take a public stand against it, and he did so out of fear. He said, we are holding the wolf by the ears and dare not let go. And what's especially outrageous is that Jefferson had a slave mistress with whom he had children who I think he actually loved. And that ought to make clear to you that all men are created equal, especially if you're the one who wrote those stirring words. But however much the practical men and even the philosophers like Jefferson tried to prevent the issue of principle from coming to the fore, you couldn't keep it down indefinitely. As you get into the late 1840s and 1850s, it unzips American society. The churches split, the charitable organizations split, finally the political parties split, and you get an incredibly bloody civil war. Something like 1 in 5 white American men of military age was killed in that conflict, and it sowed the seeds of bitterness for 100 years. And you know what? That's not practical. It often seems smart to push principle aside, but questions thrown out through the door have a way of climbing back in the window, and never more so when they're as fundamental as the issue they tried to ignore in order to admit Missouri to the Union back in 1821 without trouble. There's a new rebel campaign that I want to urge you to back. It's called They Can't Stop Us. And the background is this. You may know that the Rebels YouTube channel is far and away the biggest one in Canada. But YouTube is increasingly making noises about limiting controversial content. They're taking it down entirely, as they did briefly with Jordan Peterson before putting him back up without any explanation, or relegating it to some kind of backwater. And it doesn't take a lot of wit to guess that controversial could easily mean conservative. So the Rebel wants to create its own app, so as not to be reliant on YouTube to provide content to supporters and to communicate with you. So please, we know many of you are already backing the Rebel. We know times are tough. We really appreciate what you've done. But go and look at They Can't Stop Us at the Rebel website. Make a contribution if you can, and ensure that we can continue to provide the news and commentary that you just won't get anywhere else.